The topic tonight is has a couple of different ways of saying it, but I called it taming self-aggression, and it's come up with a couple of people that I've been talking to. The idea of people being too hard on themselves as a fairly common uh, framework within which people are doing their Dharma practice. So I thought it might be worth having a look at it. And the way to look at this and maybe other topics is using what we call prajna, or clear seeing or better knowledge that is not biased. So obviously, if we're already being hard on ourselves, then it becomes like a hall of mirrors, and we're hard on ourselves for being hard on ourselves for being hard on ourselves. So the way we want to look at it tonight is sort of more like a scientist, and more objective, almost you could say, is how is our mind working in these situations, and maybe also what could we do to tame or soften and become better friends with ourselves, which of course, as we know, would have all kinds of good implications. It seems that, some people say in the West, this is a big problem, Western Dharma students. I'm not sure that's completely true, but um, the idea of the absence of loving kindness, and especially towards oneself. But let's just take it as if it was a universal problem, and have a look at it. So we could connect this also with the idea of low self-esteem, and in general, uh, negative self-image, and on top of that, maybe a harshness uh, about the fact that we have negative self-image. So the thing that seemed really obvious and worth having a look at, again from the point of view of prajna, or discriminating awareness, is if we do have a situation in which we're being hard on ourselves, whether we're practicing meditation or not, right? There's a pretty fair way to look at it that we've sort of split ourselves into two operators, and that's something I mentioned in the post yesterday. So who's the first operator? The first operator is somebody who's administering criticism, judgmental, who's being judgmental, and who's, sort of being aggressive, actually, towards who? Well, we could say towards oneself, but there's the agency or the operator that is going, you're no good, or you stink, or I hate you, or I wish I could get rid of you. This just struck me in contemplating this as the ultimate irony of the situation, is that one operator is going, you're no good, I hate you, and then the other one is feeling like a victim, like a loser. Those two, without both of those ingredients, you actually don't have the phenomenon we're talking about tonight. So that's an interesting point, isn't it? Of course, we'll have a juicy discussion about this, but that's the way that it appears. So for example, we're take a situation where we've been through a very difficult transition recently, let's say, whatever that might be, losing a relationship, having health problems, having friends die, relatives, losing a job, not getting a job, all the various kinds of suffering that we've discussed, repeatedly. So for the time being, let's think of something like that in our world. which has given rise to harsh self-judgment. Like, it's not just enough you didn't get the job, but you didn't get the job because you were stupid, or not qualified, or not smart enough, or you weren't charming enough that day. Okay. Then we go home and we add insult to injury, basically, right? So I think everybody knows that kind of spiral, that downward spiral. The twist here is, and we've talked about aggression plenty before, the twist is that the aggression is directed towards ourselves. And, I don't think this is so easy to see. And some of us have become convinced that, there's some kind of solidity or actuality to that aggression towards ourselves, some kind of really good basis for it. And then we're going to be feeling very, very trapped there. So once we have that aggression towards ourselves, the other agent, which is the receiver of that aggression, the human being that is receiving that aggression from the harsh, hostile, judgmental witness, is starting to feel worse, and just as if somebody outside of you was berating you and judging you and yelling at you. So I really want to get that idea across of the split personality aspect of this. We're not unified. And what that means is that there's some kind of watching going on which splits us into two. And the one is the person who is creating the harsh judgment. The other one is the person receiving it. And they're both us. That's the irony of it, in this particular case. So this harsh watcher, let's call it the harsh watcher. We've talked about in meditation practice getting a neutral look, an abstract watcher. But the harsh watcher is seeing what's going on, and on top of that is commenting about it, but kind of fiercely commenting and negatively. And then nobody between the two of us, either the harsh watcher or the sad victim, let's say, the harsh watcher and the pained victim, neither of those components is really having a particularly good day. Wouldn't you say? So how can we begin to change that alchemy, that chemistry? And what would the practice of meditation have to do with that? So the thought is that in meditation practice, we are boycotting the harsh watcher, the sort of commenting one, the one who's creating the negative commentary in our mind. And we're replacing them. It's actually kind of, like at a dance where you cut in. So we're cutting in on the harsh watcher and replacing them with somebody who does see what's happening, does see what you did at the job interview, does see that you got intense and sweaty and kind of didn't present your best side, but really doesn't, on top of that, judge or punish, So you could say we screwed up, but we're not being punished for it. Or, even better, we were ourselves. And the neutral watcher, or the abstract watcher, in meditation, when you just label thinking. So this is what this would look like in meditation. Let's just say what it would look like in real life. Okay, I go in for the job interview. I don't do well. I get tongue-tied. I don't remember things that I've done that would have been relevant. I don't take opportunities that might have been positive in terms of moving the situation forward because I get too nervous and jumpy. And that's just what happened, right? Now, then the harsh watcher comes in and says, oh my goodness, you screwed up again. It wouldn't even be just the evaluation of the one time, but you did it again. And so, also, you're always doing this. You're never going to get a good job. You're never going to have a happy situation there. So that's how it goes, right? That's our mind going through that particular event. Now, later that afternoon, let's say we sit down and we meditate. Now, whatever thoughts arise, whether they're the original sort of negative feeling about ourselves or the harsh judgment on top of that, are simply noticed. It is so powerful to simply notice, and in meditation we call it bare awareness or simple awareness, naked awareness. And it's not involved with commenting or evaluating further. A lot of people don't get why this is something you would want to consider doing. But we're so caught up in the cycle of action from habit, judgment, condemnation, back around and around and around. We're just so used to that, the whole idea of interrupting the whole process, the whole mental dialogue and chatter, and simply noticing whatever arises. And you could say switching our allegiance from involvement in the storyline that we've created to simply noticing it. We've sort of taken our drama, our participation in the drama, and now we're, in a sense, you could say, rather than being in the play, we're watching. So, of course, we're not talking about becoming detached and unemotional here. We're just talking about giving ourselves a break for 1 minute to allow ourselves to see our mind arise, thoughts arise, feelings arise, and not get involved further and not try to manipulate them further. That is extremely potent. So, it was interesting when Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about suicide, which obviously, actually, I believe it was around one of the time one of the students actually committed suicide in Boston. And of course, people were asking him, what's the sort of karmic implication of suicide? He said, well, you don't really annihilate yourself fully because of this split. There's the one who wants to commit the aggression and sort of kill that person, which happens to be oneself in this case. And then there's the receiver of that. Of course, the receiver of that is temporarily taken out of the game. But he said the impression, the aggression leaves a karmic imprint that will continue and actually lead to a sort of hell realm kind of situation for that person. So it's not recommended, actually, in the Buddha Dharma, it's definitely not recommended to kill somebody else. And it's not recommended to kill oneself, if it's at all possible. And not only that, but the notion is that aggression, that kind of rejection and harshness, has probably the most powerful karmic consequence of any type of action that we can do. So a lot of the Dharma practice starts with non-aggression. How else could you say that? Gentleness, unbiased, non-judgmental, and so a lot of the emphasis in practice is on at least trying to develop an arena in which aggression is not the main vehicle. And in some sense, it is boycotted somewhat. It's similar to the notion of ahimsa in the yoga tradition of not causing harm. So we consider that aggression has a tremendous ripple effect, including aggression towards oneself. So this is something that is very particularly what we're talking about tonight, is including aggression towards oneself and trying to find another way to relate to oneself. So I see a lot of new bodies online here, or minds, whatever it is you go online with, I guess a little body, but mostly mind. And I just wanted to reiterate that you can, if you want to participate in the conversation, what you do is open a second window in your browser. Go to facebook.com/DavidNicturn, and you'll see a stream of comments, and then you'll want to refresh that every once in a while. So I see quite a few more people commenting. Hi, Justine. Let me just take a minute and say hello to some of you. Hi, Marie. Chelsea, good to see you. Nanette. Long Island, very far away. Tess. Good topic, timely topic. Being ill and unable to shift the bug feels a bit like self-aggression. Shift the bug. Wow, interesting expression. Neely's here. John Cunningham from Edinburgh. Wow. Scott. Hi, Scott. Ellie is still trying to get connected to the story of my life. Ellie, if you just are on my Facebook page, there's a link there. You can just tap it. I see Sharon's getting right into it, and we'll get to that comment in a minute, Sharon, okay? Casey Luber, yay, Casey. Okay, great, nice crowd, good group. Only thing better would be if we were all live, but this is good too. So aggression, I think this is the topic here. We want to understand what aggression is and what does it do, you know. And remember, aggression is the sort of basic act of pushing something away with force, not including, not being kind, not being gentle. And I think the important point is, before we get too far into it, to understand that it has all of these what we call kleshas, aggression, passion, ignorance, have a more enlightened twin, you know. So obviously sometimes we need to cut through, and we need to be sharp and clear with somebody. And that is not what we mean by aggression. So if, for example, we've said this before, but if somebody's hurting somebody else and you intervene, and you have to be kind of very strong about it and very forceful about it, that's not necessarily aggression. That could be aggression. That could be kind of righteous, wrathful, intelligent, compassionate action. So we want to make that distinction. Aggression is where we're either pushing our own agenda too hard, or rejecting something, rejecting our own heart, rejecting somebody else at a kind of feeling level, and causing harm to ourselves or to others. So that's what we're really talking about tonight. We're really talking about towards ourselves. So I want to be really clear and keep coming back to that topic. Let's not talk about other people tonight. What other people should or shouldn't do. I'm going to vote for that. I get one vote, but maybe I get 3 votes altogether. Let's not talk about what other people should or shouldn't do tonight. Let's look at our own self-aggression. And I think that'll be really helpful. So, of course, we could, get into a conversation about depression as a form of self-aggression. But I know there's going to be a lot of different opinions about that. So let's just try to look objectively at aggression towards oneself, however you experience that. And I'm going to open up the floor in a few minutes towards people saying something about that. Aggression in this case, and this is a sort of very important point, is the opposite of mindfulness. The type of aggression we're talking about does not occur in an atmosphere of mindfulness. It's sort of obstructs mindfulness and awareness. It also does not occur in an atmosphere of patience. Aggression is considered to be the sort of main obstacle to being patient. So when we're speedy, when we're impatient, when we're not mindful, aggression can flare. So I think I'm going to share a little thing that happened to me yesterday, just as a way of getting the tone of this across. And it's a little bit I got aggressive towards somebody else, but just how this played out. So I've been moving for 2 days. Have mercy on me, everybody. It's really not. They say, what is it? Moving, death, and taxes. I mean, it's been very ordinarily stressful. No extraordinary stress, but just the ordinary things and trying to get everything together. And I'm happy to report that I'm 60% into my new place, and now just have like a month of unpacking boxes. But it didn't go that badly. But yesterday it was not looking good. It was snowing. The movers were late. We had a time slot at the new place that was now we're going to be stressing on that. And so as I drove away from my old apartment in my car, if you can believe it, had a moment of negative mindfulness. I was going to say zero, but I would say it wasn't even zero. And I was driving a vehicle, so the car kind of swerved around the corner, and it woke me up, and I quickly came to, but I was looking, and there was a guy walking across the street, in the middle of the street, not even at the crosswalk, in the middle of the street, and he's looking at me like, what kind of a lunatic are you? And in all fairness and in perspective, he couldn't have been righter. I mean, he was absolutely 100% correct. I was the problem. So, however, at the time, and I want to talk about this in relation to something called shenpa in a moment. At the time, I couldn't hold it. I couldn't rest in any kind of ordinary awareness, and I flared, And I'm from New York. I'm pretty good at this, those of you who know me. If it comes to a New York moment, I'm kind of trained to go there. So the guy starts coming. I pull up to a red light, and the guy comes walking up behind me, and he kind of wants to have a New York-style encounter, which to me meant who knows what is going to happen next. But as I tuned into him and I kind of rolled my window down while locking the doors, because I felt like I did at least owe him some kind of dialogue, he just said, "Did you see what you just did?" And kind of he was a little bit mean-spirited, but mainly he was just saying, you just were not awake back there, and you better wake up. And from that point of view, dharmically speaking, this guy was like what we call a protector, a dharmapala. This is how Trungpa Rinpoche used to describe the dharmapalas. When you're not awake, they come and they say, would you mind please waking up right now? If you get really far off, which I was kind of off, they can become quite forceful. And even little things like slamming your finger in the door, little things that kind of cut through your haze and wake you up. So this fellow started up with that, and then I was saying, yeah, but you were walking in the middle of the street. You were jaywalking, which I knew at the time was weak. Because who cares? I myself was out of it and then aggressive, and that's just the truth of the matter. So he said, well, you could at least acknowledge that you were driving like an asshole. And at the time I couldn't say, yeah, I could at least acknowledge that. And then I kind of, that energy rush, and then I flared, and then, maybe 2 blocks later I went like, I was driving like an asshole. He was not the kindest messenger in the world, and he had his own, sort of agenda. But at the same time, I think the better part of me would have just yielded, and also let it go. Let go of my whole thing at that moment. It was a great opportunity to do that. But it took me like a block and a half to get there. So at least it didn't take me 5 years. It might be some sign of fruition there, But this is what's called shenpa. And shenpa is something that Pema Chodron has been talking about a lot lately, maybe recently, not lately, but she got this practice from Dzigar Khantrul Rinpoche, who was one of her teachers, and then she taught it quite a bit. And it's that moment where aggression arises, or the harshness towards oneself rises. It wasn't there, and now it's there, and it's kind of grabbing, it's doing that thing. And it's either doing it towards oneself or towards somebody else. And that moment when you get hooked and pulled into that pattern, it's, serious meditators will recognize this as a habitual pattern, and we'll also get used to thinking and maybe recognizing our own patterns because they're just going to come up over and over again. So sometimes this is where purification practices come in. We actually invite them to come up and really try to say, let's clean this one up. Let's not keep doing this. But the practice we're doing now is just becoming aware of it. Just having that kind of awareness come up. So, shenpa, when you practice with it, is recognizing that moment, as Pema says, when the hook goes into your mouth, your klesha, your aggression kind of boils, it hits the boiling point. In this case, we're talking about towards ourselves, so it could be like, a feeling of extreme frustration or anger at ourselves. And, give you another example. I'll use me as the guinea pig this week. Happy to do it. So I'm exhausted last night, and after moving all this stuff around, at the very end, all I wanted to do is get a little rest. At the end of the night, I'm putting the spices away, and moment of mindlessness, I knocked over the rosemary. And I don't know how it did this, but it was in a jar and screwed closed, you would think, and it hit the floor. I thought, it's going to break, and now I'm going to have broken glass on the floor and rosemary all over the floor, and no idea where the broom is or where the vacuum cleaner is or the dustbin is. No idea even where the sponge or the paper towels are. And that's that kind of flare-up of shenpa. It's not that big a deal. Honestly, you can work with it. But at the moment, it got tied into so much kind of corrosive and leftover, I can't do this, kind of energy. That's shenpa. Boom, it's there. So the practice is, if you can do it, is you recognize it right on the spot. Right then, you have a blast of awareness coming with the shenpa, co-arising with it, meeting it, stimulated by it, invited by it. And you return to awareness, present awareness. So the shenpa itself becomes the teacher, becomes the meditation teacher, as if it was your teacher that knocked over the rosemary. And interestingly enough, the jar didn't break and the cap came off, but there was rosemary all over the floor. And having regained consciousness, you could say, I just simply swept it up, So all this stuff, sometimes we add a lot of extra negativity. Wouldn't you say, to the simplest I mean, that is a simple situation. I think if you look at our days as we go by, sometimes that kind of simple situation, or even a trigger point, will trigger some kind of harshness in us towards ourselves. And that goes much deeper. That's got deep roots. That stuff is root canal time. And Dharma practice at the end of the day is not just the filling, it's a root canal. We have to go all the way to the source of our confusion, pain, and suffering, which is exactly what the Buddha did. And, really thoroughly excavate. So to do that, we must be kind to ourselves. It'll be impossible to make real progress on this particular path using aggression as the engine, using push, using shoulda, coulda, woulda. And so there's a tremendous invitation to soften and open. And the first wave of that is to let the abstract watcher work for a while. Just see it. And also to allow for the non-compounded experience of our own aggression without adding another layer to it. I hope you can all relate to this. I think it's, from talking to most of you at different times, I'll be surprised if you can't. This is something we're all working with. And the idea of leaving some time to get to know ourselves a different way than that, and leave everybody else out of the equation. Don't worry about what other people are doing. So for that, we need to spend time alone. And we need to spend time working with our own mind to start with. And that's where we are. But I think, just to sum up, and then hopefully we can have some dialogue here. So if you have questions now, again, some of you are new, go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn. Open a second window in your browser, go to that facebook.com/DavidNickTurn. And there you'll see a link, if you want, that will give you the whole scroll of comments. But you can type your comment in below there. Don't do it below the video. And if you have comments or questions, we'll just spend the rest of the time looking at those. So let's see. I know some of you usually jump in, and I see that's happened. So let's have a little discussion now, particularly around this idea that there's two of us in there, one beating the other up. One's the bully and one's the victim. I want everybody to think about that, if you don't mind. Okay, let's see who's got some things to say. Okay, coming down to the comments. Yeah, okay, B. Dawn Tepperman, great. Got through, can watch and comment. So, hi Jose. Someday you'll tell me if it's Jose or Jose, okay? Maybe today you'll tell me. Okay. So let me start with Neely, and then Sharon, I'll get to you second, okay? Casey Luber says, I love moving. It's my favorite. Oh, golly, really? You're killing me, Casey. I wish you were here. Okay, so Neely. So what about when there's not a self-critical voice, or you're able to drop that for a moment, but there's still this deep feeling of disgust? I'm not sure you dropped it if that's still happening. Or weariness with some aspect of yourself. Is this feeling self-aggression, or can it just be explored as a feeling? Okay. it can just be explored as a feeling. That's exactly what we're talking about doing. Just look at it. And I'm going to venture to say, when you first said that, Neely, that when we get past that aggression towards ourselves, it's often going to be the case. I don't want to say always. I kind of do, but I'm not going to. But it's often the case that there's some kind of sadness underlying. In terms of, I'm just speak personally again tonight, in terms of any aggression that I've discovered in my life, it's a cover-up for some kind of poignancy or sadness, sense of missed connection, disappointment in myself, any of those kind of things. So I think we can and should look more deeply at it, and that's exactly what we're talking about, without having to judge it further. Okay, so Sharon says, okay, if not about other people, I will restate my question. Don't you think sometimes we should feel bad about ourselves, our actions and our feelings? That's always where I get tripped up. Fear if I elect to always be kind to myself, I will let myself off the hook too easily. Okay, well, this is, Sharon, we've had this conversation a couple of times, so I want to be very careful in terms of framing it. And if you remember what I said about, sometimes taking inventory, acknowledging negativities that we may have created, and purifying them is part of this path. It's not the part we're talking about tonight. But so in that regard, I would say yes, sometimes we don't have to feel bad about ourselves, but we could have remorse is the word that we use officially. And we actually have regret that we behaved a certain way. But it's not to judge ourselves and feel bad about ourselves. It's to work with that and to begin to liberate that kind of cause and effect, that cause. So to do that, we have to look really deeply at it, of course. But yeah, it's not about a superficial kind of kindness. It's deep kindness in the sense that we could actually understand that we might need to change certain things about ourselves to really meet our own expectations, And that's a process of transformation. But the harshness towards ourselves is not helping it. We could substitute precision, clarity, and openness for feeling bad. You just see the impact of things. So in certain practices that we do, like Vajrasattva mantras and so forth, a Vajrasattva practice, you do invoke some kind of fundamental purity and sort of basic goodness, and then you go against that backdrop. Now let me look at the what they call drip. It's the kind of confusions and difficulties and pain that we've cultivated for ourselves and also sometimes towards others. So we can just substitute being realistic for being harsh. And we do want to change some things sometimes. So that's another side of it. I hope that we have to keep having that conversation, Sharon, because I want to make sure we really communicate on it before we get caught up in it. Mike Henderson, I hate moving. Casey Luber, I love moving. Mike Henderson, I hate moving. The last time I did it, I just had the movers pack everything. Yeah, okay. No comment. Jesse Markard, when we talk about this self-aggression, who's it being aggressive to whom? Does this idea solidify the idea of a fixed self? That's what's so great about it. It does not, in fact. It solidifies the idea of a dual notion of self. And it actually undoes the notion of a fixed self. If there was a fixed self, who's talking to who? So that's a very good question, Jesse. And in certain types of meditation, you look really carefully at who's talking to who. This idea of this dialogue and this sort of a notion that there's a solid I that's having it is completely shredded, you could say. But who's talking to who would be left as, Jesse, I'm going to hand that back to you. And you contemplate it, okay? When we get off, or the next time you have a time to meditate, and anybody else who wants to try this, for 10 or 15 minutes, just take your meditation seat and just stabilize your mind a little bit with the mindfulness of breathing. And then allow your mind to hold to this contemplation of when there is this inner dialogue that I've taken for granted for so long, who is talking to who? And like if your conclusion is, and go deeper every time you come up with a conclusion, like I'm talking to myself, well, define those people, define it more. I had a great moment in a retreat once where I just went like, this is complete, I realized it was nuts. And the whole dialogue, the whole inner dialogue, discursiveness. And I went, who's talking to who? If I'm talking to myself, I must already know it. This was my line of thought at the time. So why would I be talking to myself at all? I could just sit here and practice, do my practice. But instead I'm sitting here thinking, and talking to myself about this situation, that situation. But I must already know it because it's me talking to myself. So go through that a little bit. See if you can stay. When you do that, you don't come up with a glib answer. Oh, well, obviously there's nobody. That's not good enough. Okay? So Jesse, that's your assignment, you particularly. So Jose is saying, I find that sometimes in leaving space for the anxiety of uncertainty, being patient and noticing how I feel when things aren't going my way, action is not something that I'm moved to. So aggression toward myself or others is derailed. Well, that's good. However, sometimes this leads to a sense of stuckness. That's the shenpa, Jose. That's what I keep saying Jose or Jose because you won't tell me which way to pronounce it, but I apologize. I'm going to guess Jose. However, sometimes this leads to a sense of stuckness. Can you speak how we go from right thought to right action in this context? You need to tell me more where you're getting stuck. If you're getting stuck with the original emotion, that's the shenpa we're talking about, and that's the notion of just seeing that right on the spot is how you get unstuck. It's called getting unstuck. If you want to look up Pema Chodron getting unstuck, and there's some great stuff online that you can, I don't even think you have to pay for it. You can just read it. And some talks, maybe. But if you're talking about getting stuck with kind of not knowing where to go from there, in other words, you've derailed the aggression, now you don't know what to do, you don't know how to act, that's a different question. So if that's what you're asking, you should write again. So Christina, when we feel bad about ourselves without having compassion, we find it almost impossible to change. I agree. We get stuck in the idea of a fixed bad self, well said, instead of an ever-changing neutral self capable of being wonderful or not in the next moment. No, yes? That's right, no, yes. Well, let's see, I was with you all the way up to a certain point. We find it impossible to change, I find. It's stuck in the idea of a fixed bad self. Yeah. I would end it there. I don't think we have a neutral self necessarily, and we're not trying to neutralize these feelings, but not get stuck in them. So rather than saying what it should be or what it is, dropping away some of the negative habits, dropping away that fixation with thinking, opening to the moment, and then maybe just allowing that to ferment, see what comes up, some kind of natural being. And that natural being could be relatively wonderful or relatively not. I mean, it could be all kinds of ways. Mostly it's going to be ordinary. And then, weirdly, that natural being, when we can tap that awake being, is said to be also kind of very bright and intelligent, wise, and compassionate. So, that's interesting, isn't it? Not quite so neutral. So, Joe. Okay, hi, Joe. Last week we talked about aloneness. Yes, we did. In looking at some of the readings you recommended, I found Trungpa writes about not having a savior. Yeah, an outside agency coming to the rescue. That's what he called non-theism. I have found, though, that noting gratitude to the path has made me aware of my aggressive tendencies to myself and the other. Is the path an outside agency that can be a savior? And so can the inside agency allow me to wake up to my aggression? Well, it's a little complex, but I think if I just get the drift of it, yeah, I would call that more kind of positive version of duality, where you look at the Dharma and the path and the teacher and the teachings as other, but a kind of inspiring other. And in the non-dual version of it, you recognize that they're really kind of intimately connected with yourself. So, for example, at certain ways of working in the Buddhist teachings, the Dharma and the teacher and the practice are looked at with devotion and respect, and as an outside agency. But then we also talk about, for example, the inner guru or the meeting of minds, transmission, where we recognize it's none other than our own wisdom, and it never was different from that. Okay, Joe. So Jesse saying, sorry I hit enter before I could finish. What an idiot I am. You're making a joke. Anyway, I was going to say that shouldn't we look at the internal dialogue with a bit of skepticism as to what is going on? Definitely. We should first of all look at it as not the emes necessarily. Not the truth necessarily. It's sort of our version. Some kind of fabrication, actually. Shouldn't we look at these internal conflicts as conditioned silliness? Oh, I don't know. That seems like too hard. I would have a hard time doing that. Ultimately, of course, you go, ha, 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 but you're kind of now up in a blimp looking down on everything. And if you have that much distance, sometimes it means there's a lack of heart and connection. So I would say there's some truth in what you're saying there. It is kind of silly. Like, for example, Gelek Rinpoche used to say, when somebody gets angry, their face looks like a baboon's ass. So we don't really see what our face looks like, but if we do, it's later. If somebody filmed it or something, it does sort of look like some part of a baboon. In any case, so yeah, there's definitely a silly part, but I think also there's a poignancy to it. So it's not recognizing the humor in it is fine, and trying to get too detached maybe is, I don't know, maybe going too far. Yeah, and Christine is also saying we take ourselves terribly seriously in the dramas we stage in our heads. Well, that if you do meditation practice and you don't have some insight about that, I'm coming to your house. That's all there is to it. That is the whole idea of seeing it on the spot, and just thinking, wow, we've really made it thick and dense. Okay, I'm just going to say again, if you somehow joined in late, for these comment streams, you want to go to open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/David Nickturn. Okay, let's see. Okay, everybody, I'm going down the bottom. Okay. Nikki. Hey, everybody. The reason that person's named Nikki Nickturn is because that's my sister in Providence, Rhode Island. So, who I dearly love and who's a great person. And now she's saying something here. Let's see. Oops! Pushed send before finishing thought. Okay, that means oh, there you are. Okay, moving provides an opportunity to let go of things and make space for new. Trying to move into a larger space with fewer things. Beautiful. Absolutely, and it's what I've been trying to do, hoarder that I am, minor league hoarder. And the metaphor of that, I would say, meditation is trying to move into larger space with fewer things. That's why a lot of the aesthetic, for some of these things is a little bit more spacious. Flower arranging, Kyudo. I mean, some of these things are just not as busy. The meditative space is just not as busy. It's got space. So that's a great comment, Nikki. Thank you for that. Okay. Christina is saying, Mike Henderson, I found a similar thing happened when I started practicing. It was as though my thoughts were not all rammed up against each other any longer. They had space around them. So this is the same thing that's being pointed out here. So when I began to chastise myself for being such an idiot, see, that language sounds familiar to me, and saying this or that stupid thing, I had a space in which to see and respond to my own thought instead of reacting. It was, I agree with you, a lovely benefit of practice. Well, there you go. Hard, at least in my experience, hard to get to this kind of space without leaving some space, however you guys do that. So we have a few more minutes left, so if you have any questions or comments, now is your chance. Custer's last stand. Okay, Jose, thank you so much. Jose, okay, human being, a member of the Shambhala meditation group of Buffalo. I had no doubt you're a human being. I didn't know you were a Shambhala meditator from Buffalo, so that's really good. And thank you for clarifying that, and thank you for coming so regularly. Monica Campbell, can you talk about the difference between clear Vajra anger? Okay, just kidding. Which seems a kind of skillful means of last resort versus shenpa. Specifically, how do you tell the difference in the moment? Sometimes I've felt anger and been so upset at myself about it, but realized later it was a clear, seeing, useful type, cutting through BS. Other times I think I've acted with clarity and anger, only to realize later it was that familiar companion, righteousness, with all its sticky baggage, probably a kind of shenpa also. I find anger turns to self-hatred so easily. It's a good question. I think as long as you're trying to tell the difference, it's going to be difficult, So, the notion of Vajra, for those of you who don't know, is sort of absolutely clear, not tainted by any kind of doubt or self-consciousness or double think. So it's sort of a symbol of cutting through confusion and aggression on the spot immediately, without righteousness, without a lot of residue. And it's recommended, as Monica said, to be a kind of, don't start with that if you can find other ways of entering and relating to the situation. Sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes we don't know. We enter a situation, we do our best. But it sort of cuts cleanly. That's the difference. I would say that kind of anger is like a sharp, very sharp knife. And it's wielded very mindfully. And it's very precise. So, for example, an analogy would be a surgeon, wielding a knife, that way of doing it, rather than a butcher or a hooligan, wielding a knife. Hooligan. Where did I get that word from? Okay, so, yeah, that's a good question, though. I mean, it's worth continuing to experience that and sort of decide for yourself, I think. Let's see, who did we not get to yet? Well, let's jump to Justine, who is an old friend and has been coming around on Tuesday nights. Hi, Justine. I'm giving you a kiss right now. So, my experience is that when I notice I have been behaving badly or less than virtuous, which is often, I'm working on simply marking the behavior and not feeding into the echo that occurs. Okay, I think that's what we're talking about here. It's just noticing it. That's the abstract watcher that we're talking about. That's where it gets tricky. Starting to beat yourself up and spinning it. I try to remember it's not all about being a good girl versus bad girl, but more of an awake girl. Right on. I would say that's, exactly what we're hoping to sort of get at here. Be an awake girl. Okay, let's see. Mary Rose, we haven't covered your action today. It's like daily experience is providing us a number of tasks, challenges, tests in order for us to produce that mindful, open state of mind which we are often inclined to expect from others. That's the mistake. I assume you mean expecting it from others is the mistake. And sure, we have to, everybody talks like that, we have to be the change you want to see, all those things. We have to work with others, though, so that requires a lot of intelligence. I find it's much harder, seemingly, and maybe it's just because I'm lazy, or we're lazy, and when we're by ourselves, we don't really get tested too much, But as soon as you get into a room full of people, it's like, oh, yikes. This one wants that, and this one's mad at me because I did that, and that one's kind of charming. And all of a sudden, we have to be in the field with our Dharma. That's Dharma field practice. So, applying some of these principles can get challenging, especially with people that we're very close to sometimes. It can be very hard to be compassionate sometimes to somebody you're very close to, or awake. There's a lot of assumptions, a lot of baggage. Okay, I'm just going to take one more look. We're running out of time again. By the way, I think most of you know you can see these talks, all of them, online. And at the end we'll put a link together that you'll see. And there's, I think, about 150,000 of them at this point. Maybe 50, to be a little more precise. And you can watch them at your leisure. And also there's a way to avoid commercials. I feel a little bit like, Abby Hoffman would steal this book or some, a yippie. But Seth, could you post, if you use Firefox, there's a little link that you can hook up, and then you won't have to have these annoying commercials. So I feel that's something we should share. So Seth, if you're still there, if you could post that link again, maybe every time. Okay, so I'll see if there's any one or two very cogent comments we can end with. Lama Luis Risco, I can. Okay, you're responding to Seth's question. Do you think there's a positive side to unhelpful, repeated, sometimes compulsive habits and patterns that arguably have a basis in a significant historical life experience, and that they open up the opportunity to make a different choice? And the Lama is saying, I can. Okay? If you want to say more about that, I think a lot of people would enjoy hearing more about that. Sharon, what if there are traits you just don't like about yourself and others don't either? Well, what I would say is that's almost bound to be true for all of us. And I would also say there are probably traits about us that we do like and that others like, just to be fair. And I would say there may be traits about ourselves that we like that other people don't like, to be fair. and vice versa. God, David, you're no help at all, right? That's what you're thinking. All right, so if we don't like it, I think is the main point. Other people don't like it or not, it either resonates with us or not. If we're defensive, it's clearly resonating with us. That to me is something I've adapted. If I'm feeling defensive in body, speech, or mind, and often body is where you really can tell, probably somebody's getting too close to the truth. That's been my personal experience, when my body tenses up. It's not because them, it's because me. So, we can either decide if there are traits, if it resonates with us and it's traits about ourselves that we don't like for example, being too arrogant or too selfish or too impatient. We can deliberately set out to change those. And not from a ground of aggression or hostility or mean-spiritedness, but from a sense of generosity and kindness. So I would say there's definitely at a certain point an element of really recognizing, taking inventory of one's traits that we don't like about ourselves, and going to the root and the ground of those and seeing if we can't open that space back up. And we can do that without aggression. That's called Dharma practice. Exactly what that is called Dharma practice. Doing exactly that.